Welcome to Glass In Session. We're in season 19, year 6, and we are taking a tour or giro of northern Italian wine regions. I'm your host, Val. Thank you so much for being here, for clicking play, for subscribing, and for being the kind of person that I am pretty sure I would enjoy sharing a bottle with. Today, we're going to see what there is to sip in Lombardia, or some people say Lombardy or Lombardy. Lombardia is actually easier for me, so that's what we're going to call it. But first of all, where the heck is it? It's a decent-sized wine region, I'll give you that much, and it's got over 30,000 hectares or nearly 58,000 acres of vineyards. It is Italy's most populated region. It is also known for its industrial and urban developments, and Britannica tells us that Lombardia also leads Italy when it comes to agriculture, from livestock to rice to fruit. Well, that's what we're here for. We're here for the wine and the grapes. So this is quite an interesting region to explore. It is Trentino Alto Adigé's neighbor to the west, and we covered Trentino Alto Adige in the first 2 episodes of this season, both linked up for your reviewing or listening pleasure should you so choose. It borders Switzerland to its north and Piemonte to its west, and we're going to hit up Piemonte later this year. Can't wait. And you may recognize some places from Lombardia, such as Milano or Milan, its capital, and Lake Como. The region itself is rich in lakes and rivers, as well as mountains ascending to over 13,000 feet in its alpine zone. Lake Garda, or Lago di Garda, is also included in this region, and we did cover that last season. So, every time I mention a previous episode, I will link it up for you in the show notes, so you won't have to go poking around for it. As per the usual, I like to start with a little history, especially as vine growing goes. And in this case, it takes us all the way back to the Bronze Age. Thus far in the season, I've mentioned the different tribes in northern Italy who were all into growing grapes and the making of wines, such as the Rhaetians and the Etruscans, since about the 7th century BCE. And it was also the Celts who had made Lombardia their home in the 5th century BCE. But then along came the Romans, and get out your wine history bingo card here. In the early 200s BCE, of course, they conquered the place, as Romans were wont to do back then. That's what they did. And then the region was officially, I guess, part of what was referred to as Cisalpine Gaul. And that's okay, because Hannibal rolled up on the joint in about 218, joined up with the Celts, and kicked Rome the hell out. But the Romans took it back in the late 100s BCE, and in 42 BCE, bam, Italy incorporated Lombardia into the top of its boot. More tribal scuffles? Sure. They put the kibosh on the Roman Empire peace for about 200 years, and from the 6th to 8th century, it was the Germanic tribe called the Lombards who made this area the center of their kingdom, and thus we have the name Lombardia. But the sad thing about this was that viticulture was all but kicked to the curb for centuries. In 774, we do say goodbye and peace out to the kingdom of the Lombards, as this area was swallowed up by Charlemagne, king of the Franks. It belonged to the Frankish kingdom under the Carolingian Empire for, about 100 years or so, until the dissolution or conscious uncoupling of said empire. By then, villages asserted their own rule by their own bishops and counts or whatever, coming under a feudal system of governance, if you will. And during this time, known as the High Middle Ages, from about 11th century on, we have the church to thank once again for the vine and the wine revival. Did the wine suck back then? Probably. But you have to start, again, somewhere. These mostly prosperous villages were trade-based thanks to the Po River, which is now quite important to the wine-growing part of this part of Italy. When, in the 1100s, these villages were able to kick the old feudal system to the curb, what emerged is something we still see today in Italy, comunes or communes. And these are what you're going to find listed in the rules and regulations when it comes to these districts or these demarcated regions of Italy. They always mention the communes in which grapes can be grown and wine can be made. And if you're working on your Italian citizenship, I believe on the paperwork you have to claim your home comune or commune. So it is still a thing today. I do know that. But don't worry, there were more conflicts ahead. Crazy monarchs like Frederick I Barbarossa, who tried to roll up on Lombard land, resulting in the formation of the Lombard League, which was like, oh, hell no, Freddy. As of 1183, according to the Peace of Constance, you will unass our territory and respect our authority. I mean, our volition, free will. You're like not the boss of us. But then, because we can't have nice things, there was infighting amongst the Lombards' political factions and dynasties, and the emerging of despots, kind of like in America right now, which is why we can't have nice things. And eventually, Milano arising as the ruling and most powerful city in the Lombard realm from the 1300s to the 1500s. Something else that happened in the 1500s was the influence of French winemaking processes, and this, fair listener, is where we see the emergence of one of my favorite wines from Italy, the Chiaretto, all the way back in the 1500s. Now, I've talked about this wine ad nauseum in the Garda episode, linked, specifically from the Bardolino appellation, but they make them here in Lombardia too. Score! Another thing that occurred amongst the vines in the 16th century was the integration of vine training, trellising, and pruning. Why is this important? Because before that, they were just kind of, like growing the vines up the trees. And I think I talked about that in the Afghanistan episode. That is a very effective way of growing vines back in the day. They just kind of let them just climb up the trees because why not? That's what vines do. There was some decline in the 1600s due to the popularity of the silk trade, as in, hey, we need mulberry trees because that's where the silkworms live and that's where the silkworms do their thing. Remember, textiles, trade-heavy areas, and Venice was right in the middle of this, to the point where some towns were actually given over to the Venetians as they were hugely powerful, very strong, very powerful about this time, and eventually the Swiss and the others scooped up some of the towns. But there was also some back and forth from the 16th to the 19th century between the Habsburgs, both the Spanish and the Austrian varieties, until the unification of Italy in the mid to late 1800s. And by that time, the triple threat of powdery mildew, blight, and the phylloxera vine louse led to a revamping of vine-growing philosophy, such as the integration of grafting, which we've heard a lot about, to these vine stock from mostly America, of course, and species that are more phylloxera resistant. And then there was also a continual strive toward improved viticultural and winemaking tactics that give us the very cool, and I'm going to say pantheon of grapes and appellations in Lombardy that we get to sip today. So let's get into them. There are so many appellations to sift through in this region, and I know I focus a lot about appellation, and the reason I do that is because when you go into a wine store, a lot of times, if you know where the wine is from or the specific appellation, that gives you the best clue as what is in that bottle if the winemaker doesn't have the courtesy to list on the bottle what is actually in the bottle so the bottle can sell easier. But there are so many appellations to sift through in this region, and I don't want to overload you with all the blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to hit some of the major ones, and that you're most likely to find these in the international market, even here in Colorado Springs, where, yes, we do have paved roads and very few loose chickens. Thank you very much. With a quick summary, over 40 appellations. Yeah, you don't want me talking about all of them. 5 of them at the top of the so-called wine quality pyramid or DOCG level, and we'll hit these up shortly. And then at the DOC level, also a quality level wine, we'll find 21 appellations. And this, along with the DOCG level wines, are nearly 80% of production. So I don't focus on the IGT or Indicazione Geografica Tipica very much. There are 15 appellations at that level. That's only 9% of production. Doesn't mean the wines aren't good. It just means geographically protected. And that's what you'll see IGP or IGT, depending on where you are in Europe. Those are protected, meaning protected geographical growing and production zones. Whereas we climb this quality pyramid to like DOP for foods, and we'll see DOC and DOCG for Italian wines, for example. This means the production rules just become a little bit more strict and it's harder to earn those labels. Thus, the little strip you see in Italy sealing the labels on Italian wines at these levels. Not only are there a slew of appellations and styles produced in Lombardia, which blew my mind because there were some I'd either forgotten about in my past wine education life or just never studied. But the grapes, some you know, Nebbiolo, Barbera, Moscato. Oh my, you've heard about all these. Some you may be like, well, Croatina, Cortese, Bonarda. Some we've just learned about recently, Gropello, in the Lago di Garda episode last season. One we hit up back in season, I think it was 2, in the Lambrusco episode. This was my Lambrusco Love Fest, and oh, what a love fest it was. And I did link it up because Lambrusco is also important to this wine region in Lombardia as well. And this is going to set us up nicely for a little grape gab coming up soon, so keep your ears open for that. But first, let's get into the appellations. I like to start with sparkling wine, whether I'm doing a physical tasting, whether I'm doing a meal, whatever it is. And even at the beginning of my podcast seasons, you'll know I do start with some kind of sparkling wine because not all sparkling wine is created equal. It's made with different grapes, different styles all around the world. And I find sparkling wine one of the most fascinating styles. Now, I've already started season 9 with one of these appellations, a DOCG appellation called Franciacorta. And I linked it up for you, so I'm not going to rehash it. But what I will remind you is that is a sparkling wine made in the classic method or metodo classico. And that's kind of where we always kind of reach back to the champagne or champenoise style of wine, because that's where, the wine mothership of education calls us home, because that's where we learn first about making wine that is fermented in the bottle in which it's sold. And that is what Franciacorta is. Grapes, different, production, a little different, region, of course, very different. And I don't like to compare the two, but I do like to have two in my cellar at all times. And there is another DOCG in Lombardia that you may not have heard of as much. It's called Oltrepò Pavese Metodo Classico. And you're like, what? I know. There are some differences. I'm going to compare the two. Franciacorta and Oltrepò Pavese, when I write in my notes, the OP Metodo Classico, the OPMC, there are a few differences in the production as far as the grape blends go and the styles. For example, the native white yerba mate is allowed in Franciacorta and up to 10% in the spumante, rosato, spumante styles. And the Setten is a unique term to Franciacorta. For Oltrepò Pavese, the Pinot Noir minimum requirement is higher. It's around 70%, and Yerba Mate is not an authorized grape, but Pinot Grigio is authorized in the Oltrepò Pavese. The styles do include a Cremant versus the Sauternes. Drinks kind of the same as far as the creamy texture on the sun, less atmospheres of pressure in the bottle versus a Spumante, as well as the varietally labeled styles, such as a Pinot Noir Spumante. They've got white and rosé styles, which they sometimes called a Cruaze, a very specific term to the Oltrepò Pavese Consortio. Finally, the aging time on the lees for Oltrepò Pavese is shorter, 15 months versus 18 months, unless you're making a rosé or Setten. In Franciacorta, that's going to be 2 years. Now, 2 years versus 3 years for single-year vintages, or what they call millesimato. And unlike Franciacorta Riserva, with its whopping 5 years minimum on the lees, I don't see a Reserva style listed here for Oltrepò Pavese. So slight differences in the grape blends, the aging requirements, and even some of the terminology you might see on the bottle. Pinot Noir is the star grape of the Oltrepò Pavese Metodo Classico sparkling appellation. And according to the Oxford Companion of Wine, there was more Pinot Noir grown in Oltrepò Pavese than anywhere else in Italy, mostly for actually DOC level bottling. So that's fun. OCW also tells us that this is the largest growing region in Lombardia, and that this part of Lombardia was actually part of Piemonte for about 100 years before Italy's unification. While the sparkling Oltrepò Pavese Metodo Classico appellation has only been a DOCG since 2007, the whole area of Oltrepò Pavese has a history dating back hundreds of years. The OP zone, the Oltrepò Pavese zone, does contain 6 DOC-level appellations where all that Pinot Noir is probably going, and the primary grape grown here is actually the Croatina, which we'll grape gab out very shortly. The original DOC of Oltrepò Pavese, like I said, it was there before this classic method sparkling wine was on the radar, and that appellation dates back to 1970. And among those other DOC level wines or those appellations we're going to find in this growing area of the OP, there's a San Colombano, home to whites made with Chardonnay, reds made with Barbera, Pinot Noir, and Croatina, and a super fun appellation that I actually found here in Colorado at my local wine cellar, shout out to Dirk, was the Sangue di Giuda del Oltrepò Pavese appellation, or the Sangue di Giuda DOC. Now this is a fun, funky wine created with red grapes, Barbera, and there's that Croatina again. We'll hear about it later. This appellation is only for sweet reds and sparkling, which I've enjoyed, and dessert styles. A little nugget I did gather from Quattro Calici on this wine is that the name, which translates to blood of Judas, sangue is blood, in Italian, Juda is Judas, that this appellation name has something to do with local lore regarding Judas, the Bible character guy, being resurrected in a nearby village who, I guess, repays the locals for his second chance of life. And like I'm back by, saving the vineyards from the scourges which can destroy them like pests, etc. Sure. Also in the growing region of OP where we are finding some of these fun sparkling wines, we do have some single varietal appellations dedicated to some international grapes such as Pinot Noir and Pinot Grigio, and even a DOC appellation split out just in 2010 only for the red wines made with mainly Croatina, and this appellation is called Bonarda del Altropo Pavese, DOC. This brings us to this very much needed cork dork moment, because Croatina is such an important grape to this region, and many of us may have yet to get our lips on it, but it is important, so here we go. Croatina, 17% of plantings, according to the ItalianWineCentral.com. It's a black or red grape, depending on what your school is, officially listed in 1970. In Italy, nearly half of the almost 6,000 acres are grown in Lombardia, but about the same amount in Piemonte, with a tiny bit in Emilia-Romagna. The history of the grape is documented back to the Middle Ages in the zone of Altropo Pavese around a commune called Rovescala, but it was more rigorously mentioned from the 19th century on. Now, on the vine, the bunches are going to be somewhat elongated and conical in form. We've seen bunches that are kind of short and really tight, and then we see these long, like cone-shaped bunches. In this case, the berries are kind of a blue-black. They're medium in size as vinifera species grapes go. And in that glass, of course, the wine is going to be red because there's often skin contact, quite quaffable depending on the style, and loaded with red fruit. 9 of Lombardia's appellations at the DOC and IGT level feature Croatina. Besides, oh, Val, that's cool. It makes red wine in Italy. Tastes fruity. Pour me a glass. Okay, thanks. Bye. What else is important to know about Croatina? Well, fair listener, this is the rub. You're going to see the synonym Bonarda associated with Croatina, particularly in Altropo Pavese. But this is important. This is not the same as the Bonarda from Piemonte or This is not, I repeat, not the same as the Bonarda from Piemontese, or what they call the Bonarda Piemontese sometimes, which is also confused with the Bonarda potentially from Argentina that I gabbed on way back in season 14. In fact, according to Wine Grapes, there are about 6 different varieties that may have nothing to do with each other called Bonarda. So there you go. The wine grape world, in terms of names and origins, can sometimes feel like scorpions in a bowl, despite DNA sequencing. But if you have an interest in wine education or are a raging enthusiast, you are, like me, ever fascinated and ever curious to know and sip even more. So Blood of Judas indeed. Didn't see that one coming? Sweet. Moving on to other appellations that really ring my bell from Lombardia are in the Valtellina zones. 2 DOCGs of Sforzato di Valtellina DOCG and Valtellina Superiore DOCG. These have been rare finds for me, but they are out there. And the region I'm speaking about is the alpine region of Valtellina. This growing region sits at a horizontal strip of land in the Adda River Valley along both banks. And it's furthest north in the Lombardia region as the grape-growing regions go. This is one of the earliest established DOCs in Italy, beginning in 1968, with the 2 DOCGs created much later. The wines from Valtellina are made with the red grape Nebbiolo. Only here it's called Chiavenasca. The DOCG created in 1998 is Valtellina Superiore DOCG. Again, only red wine here, and it must be a minimum of the Chiavenasca, aka Nebbiolo. This is also one of those regions that, when I was studying for my Wine and Spirit Education Trust diploma, I would lay in bed at night and try to remember all 5 subzones of this appellation. Yes, these are the things that keep wine students up at night. Is it important to you? Probably not, so I'm not going to go into much detail about them. But what is interesting is that some of these wines can be bottled in Switzerland. What? Just north of this growing zone over the border. Instead of using any of the subzones that used to keep me awake at night, Grumello, Inferno, Moroggio, Sacella, and Valgella, as well as their styles, which ones are the more fruit-driven, more elegant, more powerful, etc., you'll see something called Stagafasli on the bottle, which indicates such Swiss bottlings of Italian-grown and made wine, but they can be bottled in Switzerland. And by the way, the Vini di Valtellina website does have cool maps of this region. the growing areas and the subzones and what makes each one special, because a lot of times you need to know those if you're doing advanced wine studies, if you want to geek out on it, because I linked it up in the show notes just for you. Okay, for me too. Otherwise, the wines require 2 years of aging, 1 year in wood, and the Reserva styles, whether from one of the 5 subzones or not, requires 3 years of aging. The other DOCG from Valtellina is one of my favorites, Forzato di Valtellina, which has been its own DOCG since 2003. Again, all red wines here, at least 90% Chiavenasca or Nebbiolo. But here's the thing about these wines. These are Passito-style wines in which the grapes are dried and the wines are actually dry. Think of the Amarone or the Ripasso styles in which I talked about the wines from dried grapes episode that aren't sweet, and that episode is linked as well. A little higher in alcohol, starting at 14%, and a lot of aging time on these wines. And why is the alcohol higher? Remember, as the grapes dry, the sugars are concentrated. So when these grapes are pressed, you have a lot more sugar to convert to alcohol, thus starting around 14%. You got to have 1 year in wood, which is included in the 20-month minimum aging requirement by law. Also by law, the winemaker isn't allowed to start fermenting the grapes until the 1st of December of that year of harvest. And the wines cannot be sold before the 1st of December, 2 years after harvest. Now let's talk about another unique thing that is worth seeking out. This one is from the Moscato di Scanzo or Scanzo DOCG. Now you might be thinking, hey Val, didn't you go on and on about Moscato d'Asti DOCG before, like a sparkling Moscato? Yeah, that's nothing new. Well, yeah, I did go on and on about that in neighboring Piemonte, linked it up, but this, dear listener, is an appellation that only came into its own in this century at the beginning of the 2000s. It sits on 30 acres in the middle of the Lombardia region, and the Moscato grape in question is not the white Muscat Blanc à Petit Cron of Asti Spumanti fame, but the red Moscato Nero grape. What? A black Moscato grape. How cool is that? What we can presume here is that the wines from Scanzo, if you see that on a label, are made with 100% of these Moscato Nero grapes. They're going to be sweet. Why? Well, this is another Passito-style wine with a minimum 3-week grape drying time. They are required by law to have at least 24 months aging with a minimum alcohol by volume of 14%. Yes, please, and thank you. I've never seen one in the wild that I can remember, most likely because they only produce about 1,400 or so cases a year. But when the OCW describes them as, quote, decadently aromatic, you know it's something that one must get their lips on at least once in their wine-curious life. So that is Scanzo DOCG, made with the black or the Moscato Nero grape. Did I mention Lambrusco earlier as the large Lambrusco Montalbano appellation down in the southeast corner of the region is known for Lambrusco wines from some of the very varieties of Lambrusco I talked about in the aforementioned Lambrusco Love Fest, plus some new ones I'm about to right now. So these are going to be lower in ABV or alcohol by volume, 10 to 11%, depending on whether one of the 2 subzones, either the Ultrapo Mantovano or the Viadanese Sabionetano, is indicated on the bottle. And there will be reds and rosé styles from this appellation. But the last ones I'm going to mention here that we talked about briefly in the Lake Garda episode, there were the whites from Lugana, which is partially in the Veneto. So you can go back and listen to the Garda episode where I found them kind of all clumped together around the southern and then the western shores or the Brescia side of Lake Garda, respectively. Here we also have white wines, red wines, rosato or rosé-style wines, as well as sparkling wines, dessert styles, mostly Passito, all made with international and local varieties. So you're going to find Rieslings here. You're going to find Chardonnay, Barbera, Marzemino, and Schiava, which we mentioned in the Trentino Alto Adige region, as well as the Tokai Friulano, the white grape we cork-dorked out in the last episode, which is more famous in Friuli Venezia Giulia. Whew. So, the takeaway from this episode, it's certainly a huge variety of styles and grape varieties from Italy's most populated region and biggest industrial and agricultural player. So I'm hoping that you found a nugget today from the classic method, serious fizz, to the fun, sweet, quaffable reds and everything in between, structured Nebbiolo to everything Croatino wants to be in a glass, not to mention the stunning alpine beauty of this region. I ask you, what is not to love other than the fact that we are not there right now, sipping something that I just yammered on about together, looking at the mountains and thinking there's no place on earth you'd rather be? I say nothing. Just something to think about. Let's bring it on home. Until the day that we're all just sitting in a peaceful alpine village, sipping something local, eating something local, I thank you for clicking play, for subscribing, for keeping a spot open for me in your podcast feed, and thank you so much for joining me. I also have a shout out this week to Vinit from Million Podcasts, where he told me I currently sit at number 5 for wine education podcasts. So thank you, Vinit, for the cute badge. I stuck it on my glassinsession.com website. And to Andy, who reached out, one of my grad school cohort from over 20 years ago. I promise that an episode on Portugal is going to happen one of these days. Thank you so much for listening, and stay thirsty, my friend. Meanwhile, you can always reach out to me via email, val@glassinsession.com, or the socials. Pick your poison. Blue Sky, Glass in Session, Vino With Val on Threads and Instagram, where you'll see Glass in Session trademarked in my bio. I'm on Spoutable, Glass in Session. Sometimes I'm on Vino With Val on Pinterest, not very often, and probably once or twice a month on Facebook/Glass in Session. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm there a little bit more often because my profile, a little more complicated. Lots of wine letters after it, diploma wine and spirits, certified wine educator, French wine scholar, letters, wine stuff, and also audiobook narrator, which reminds me you can find this podcast and the latest audiobooks I've narrated on Audible. I will also mention that there is Glass in Session and podcast swag in my TeePublic store, where you'll also find your wine history bingo graphics linked all the way down at the bottom of these show notes and on my website. And this week, I'm not hawking hangover cures, clothing, or mental health apps, so scoring yourself some swag is a small way to support the Winecast. Glass in Session is a production and registered trademark of Vino With Val, LLC. Music is Write Your Story by Joy Stock. Website is glassinsession.com/podcast.